Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called The Dyslexia Duo.
So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us. Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa,
and we're the
Dyslexia Duo.
We have a very special guest today with us. She has authored books. She is all over the place. She has her own agency called the Dyslexia Training Institute. And we are just very, very excited, very, very pleased that she's here with us today. And it is, and let me give you another hint. If you have ever used that video, that 4.5 minute video to talk about dyslexia, and everybody has it on their site.
It might be on my website right now.
It might be what I trained. I introduce training with every time I start day one, and I have a group starting Monday, day one. So I use that for an introduction. Fabulous. But if you've ever used the What is Dyslexia video, then you know who she is. This is Dr. Kelli Sandman-Hurley, and we're so excited.
Thank you for having me.
We are honored. Now, Dr. Kelli Sandman-Hurley, do you prefer to be called Dr. Kelli, Dr. Hurley, or Dr. Sandman-Hurley?
Just Kelli.
Just Kelli.
Kelly's fine. Yeah.
Well, go ahead and tell our audience a little bit, because we have kind of a wide audience. We have parents, we have dyslexia teachers, we have teachers that aren't teaching dyslexia, we have practitioners, and we have therapists and QIs out there that listen. So go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience a little bit.
Okay. I am the co-founder of the Dyslexia Training Institute. We founded DTI, or Dyslexia Training Institute, in 2008. At the time, it was me and my business partner, Tracy. Tracy has since retired, so now it's me and my entire staff of amazing people that really make it what it is. We offer online courses. So we offer courses in what dyslexia is, reading comprehension, special ed law, structured literacy, Orton Gillingham. We also are an accredited program. So we offer certification in Orton Gillingham and structured literacy. We also offer a certificate in advocacy. So if you want to be a dyslexia advocate, you can be certified through our program. Everything's virtual. The classes are kind of self-paced, kind of not self-paced. They do occur within a time frame, but we do have instructors in there, and you do have to complete it within a certain time frame, but you don't have to be on a Zoom all day long, that kind of thing. I don't know if I want to go on about myself, but I also wrote 3 books, one called The Dyslexia Advocate, which is definitely the most popular book. And that one was written mostly because as I was advocating, I was getting really tired, and I just couldn't handle the amount of clients I was getting. And then, just the national, I was getting emails from all over the country, and I'm like, okay, you know what? I just need to create a resource. So I wrote that, and it just resonated with a lot of people. So that one is really for parents. It's really for everybody. Definitely everybody. Parents probably get the most use out of it. I think it's really useful for teachers to read it so that they understand what the law is. And then I know I've had a lot of other advocates and attorneys read it. And then I wrote Dyslexia and Spelling, which is a book that I wrote about spelling. I also have a master's degree in linguistics. So there it is. So I wrote a book about why spelling is hard for kids with dyslexia. And then it's full of practical ideas of how you can teach spelling. Because we do, in my opinion, in my experience, tend to forget to teach spelling and forget how important spelling is to people and their self-esteem and their ability to get ahead and things like that. My last book was The Adult Side of Dyslexia, which was my passion project. I did come from the adult literacy world. So I worked at Read San Diego, which is the adult literacy program of the San Diego Public Library. I live in San Diego, and I worked there for 12 years. And that's really where all of this started. So I worked with adults that whole time, and they would come into my office and just cry, during the initial assessment, during the initial intake. And I'll never forget them. I always write about this man, Linford. So I tell his story in my book, and he and all of the other adults are the reason that I do this. So my passion really is the adult literacy, but I wanted to, Tracy and I actually met at the library. She worked there too. And we wanted to get to the kids before they became the adults. So that was the whole reason for DTI to begin with, on top of the fact that being in San Diego, when we started in 2008, it was impossible to find Orton Gillingham training west of the Mississippi. And this was before the internet and all of that. So we had to fly somebody out from Michigan. They trained us for 2 weeks. And then I was like, this is ridiculous. Let's put it online. So we were the first people to put it all online. And then it's just kind of grew from there. And then we started, and then I also created Dyslexia for a Day, which is the simulation kit. That's also really popular. So if you want to send a group through what it feels like to have dyslexia socially and emotionally, you can put them through that. It has a script and a link to a video, and then you can just put a whole group through it. That's how we started, though. We started, wanting to do classes, and then we're like, let's open it up for tutoring. So we had 3 tutoring offices here in San Diego. We now just have 1. COVID kind of took care of that. So I still have employees who still do it, but it's all on Zoom now. And then the way the advocacy came about was through those clients came into our office and was telling me what was happening in the IEP meetings. This one mom came in, and I've never done this before. And she's like, would you please listen to this IEP meeting? And I was appalled at what I heard. And like, I have to do something. So at the University of San Diego here, they have an advocacy class. So I started there, and then it just snowballed from there. That was a lot. That's a long answer to your question. We've been around for a long time, and we keep adding things. So there's all kinds of stuff that we do that you can find on our website. Yeah,
you do an awful lot. You do an awful lot of good for the dyslexia world. And I was just so excited when you said you would come on our show.
Yes, very excited. And you have accomplished a whole lot in your short life. You just look so young and so vibrant. And I really appreciate that you have worked so hard to accomplish all of those things for all of us here in the dyslexia world, because you've impacted all of us in one way or another.
I really appreciate that. I also have a filter on, but I really do appreciate that. Thank you. And right back at you guys. I appreciate everyone who goes out there and does this, because it's not easy. And we need younger people to start doing this as well, because I don't know if you've noticed, but we need more young people joining our ranks.
Yes, I agree with that. I remember I've been doing some form of dyslexia since 92, right? And so I would go to the conferences, and I'm like, no, I can't make this claim any longer. But I would look around going, my gosh, I'm the youngest one here. Is that real? But no, I'm no longer able to make that claim. But
I am the old lady now. Yeah.
And I almost think too, the arthritis starts setting in. So flipping cards, it does get a little bit harder as your muscles get.
Trying to remember what you did the first lesson, if you didn't write it down. Yeah. Yes.
That's
absolutely.
Right. How much of an increase in awareness is there now compared to 10, 15, or even 20 years ago?
Okay. So I loved this question, because it's kind of infuriating, really. I always wake up and think, oh, we've done it. Everybody knows what it is. It's obvious. There's so much information out there. There's so many people talking about it. And then I wake up to 3 emails from parents, telling me that the schools are saying the same thing they've been saying forever. So I think there's an increase in awareness, but I don't think it's even close to where it should be. So I do still hear parents telling me the same things. They're still saying to wait. They're still saying not to label them. They're still saying, they'll grow out of it. They're still saying dyslexia doesn't exist. It's still happening all the time. I'm going to, throw my state under the bus. California is way behind. And so, a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, you live in California, but you guys have it all figured out. I'm like, quite the opposite. It's a mess. And so I just, it shouldn't be that way, because you can just Google it and there's so much information out there. So there's not enough awareness. I think there's more, but I don't think I think we're spending too much time talking to each other. I think the dyslexia community preaches to the choir constantly. If you go to a dyslexia conference, everybody there already knows that information. They're just kind of there to network, in my opinion. And you kind of branch out maybe and go to other conferences, which is what we did before COVID hit. We started branching out to other conferences, which was really, really helpful. But we needed this, start talking to corporations, human resources managers, places where you can get corporate training in and, get the universities involved too.
I think that's the biggest thing that we're still seeing. So I remember when I went to college in 86 to early 90, right? And was education the whole time. In fact, my minor was reading, and we never once, except for one day, we talked about dyslexia for maybe 10 minutes. And then when I was hired on, because we've had Texas dyslexia law in place since 1985, right? So before I graduated high school, it was there. And when I got hired into my position, I had no idea how or what to do. And I was a see Jane run reader, right? So I never had to unblend and learn all of that. So that was a learning curve for me, but it still exists. I got my master's in 2018. And again, one course talked about dyslexia, and it was I was doing curriculum and instruction, and one course talked about dyslexia. And I was like, why is this still happening? We have down the road from me, there's 2 major universities, and one is the Reading Recovery Hub.
Oh, yeah. Then San Diego as well. Yes. Yep. I got my doctorate. I had to fight to get somebody to be my dissertation chair.
Because I remember you saying that on your podcast.
They just said, the person who ended up being my chair is actually a very influential person, but it's just still there. It's still there. It's still there. I don't know. It's very political. A lot of times people spend their whole life doing research on one thing, and they don't want to have to pivot and say I was wrong. Then, so I think a lot of it could be that. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I think it's okay to say I was wrong and then move on. But, I don't know. There's a lot of ego involved, in my opinion.
So it sounds to me like the university level needs to do some modifications in their instruction as well. I graduated with my bachelor's in 2010, and we didn't talk anything about dyslexia at all. So I had no idea what dyslexia was when somebody approached me with a job opportunity. So I thought, well, I have no idea how to teach somebody how to read. That seems so bizarre because I had an education degree in early literacy. So I didn't know how to teach somebody who really needed help. Yeah.
I know Tracy and I, we exhibited at International Literacy Association in San Antonio a while back. And we were like, oh, we're in Texas. Everyone's going to know this, right? They have this law, all this stuff. And teachers would come up and say, I'm the dyslexia specialist, and I don't know anything about dyslexia. How can you help me? Over and over and over again. I'm like, whoa, okay. I don't know what's going on, but, okay, we'll help. It's fine. But it was, even in Texas with all the laws, there's not a lot of training going on.
No, and I don't understand that. We still see a lot of that top-down approach, start with comprehension. And one of the things I tell my trainees, we can't get to the big oversized chairs in the corner of the room with the fairy lights and the big bookcase and that love of reading for our kids until we walk through the trenches with our students with phonology and decoding and fluency and morphology, all of that. I want to go back to something that I remember reading in one of your books, and I believe it was the Dyslexia Advocate I was reading, and then hearing in one of your podcasts about the reluctant reader. And one of the things that it made me harken back again, going back to one of my campuses when I was at the teacher level of my training. And I had a little boy who was just extremely, extremely blocked, who was in one of my dyslexia therapy or dyslexia classes. I wasn't a therapist yet. Dyslexia classes. And we had a teacher who was reading recovery based, and she was really good friends with his mom. And she kept saying, oh, I don't think he's dyslexic. He's just not ready to read. He was 4th grade.
Yeah.
I mean, how can he be not ready to read? And so kind of bring in your reluctant reader, because it really resonated with me. It made me think of that student.
Well, I mean, you have to think about it this way. Nobody wants to not be able to read. There's nobody on the planet who goes to school and is like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to wait for a little while. or, I'm just not ready. Nobody, it's just, and then when you tell them or their parents that they're a reluctant reader, the use of the word reluctant means that they're making a choice. They're choosing not to read. Because if I'm reluctant to go run 5 miles, that's because I don't want to. It's not because I can't. I think that's what I mean to say. And, it's just, you put the onus back on the student when you say they're a reluctant reader, like it's their fault. If they're not, they can't read, or I've never met anyone who can't read anything, but they're having difficulty reading, and it's very, very difficult for them. If they could read, they would. People, back to all saying dyslexia is a gift, that whole conversation, you don't want to talk to a kid who's really struggling and tell them how lucky they are. One day you're going to be a famous artist. That's just untrue. So, that it's all the things that we say to them that they hold with them forever. So in my book, The Adult Side of Dyslexia, I asked them all questions about that. And all of them remember just feeling so much shame and feeling like it was their fault, and they were embarrassed because they really thought that, well, the school knows what they're doing, so it must be my fault that I can't read. So that's the whole reluctant reader thing is. It just puts so much blame on the victim, and that's just wrong. And just the little words we use, and we don't really think about the words that we're using, that they carry it with them forever. So just things like that we have to be really careful about.
No, that really resonated with me.
Something I perceive from my students is when they do feel that reluctance or that inability, they perceive that everybody else in the class can read and they're the only ones who can't.
100%.
And
yes.
They put that all on themselves, that there is something massively wrong with them. But they don't know that other child might have just as much of a problem reading, or somebody else might have a problem with math, or somebody else might have a problem with written expression, but they don't see it that way because reading is essential to everything.
Right.
And that's what most of the focus is on in the classrooms as well. So you can understand how they would put that all on themselves in such a negative way.
Absolutely. And they carry it with them all their lives.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi there. This is Amy Rodenroth, owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services. So tell me if any of these situations are familiar to you. Your dyslexia teacher / therapist has suddenly retired unexpectedly, and you do not have the personnel to fill the space, or you do not have enough trained teachers or therapists for the number of students who have qualified for dyslexia services, and you need a trained teacher or therapist quickly, like yesterday, quickly. Or you need a teacher to provide compensatory services, and you do not have anyone that can provide what's needed. Well, what do? I'm going to tell you what you can do. You can call Discovery Dyslexia Services. Discovery Dyslexia Services can help you with your various dyslexia concerns. We have multiple CALTs who can provide virtual small group therapy. We can also train your teachers in most dyslexia curricula, either virtually or on site. Just let us know how we can help support you. For more information, go to our website at www.discovereed.com. Let me spell that for you. DYSCOVEREAD.com. And I know it's a funny name, but we're providing huge services for our dyslexic population. So keep in mind, Discovery Dyslexia Services, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show. When I first started, I do not remember, and we're talking 92, so this is some time ago. I don't remember dyslexia being under anything. There were dyslexia services. So I had some SPED kids that would come to me that had a SPED label, but then some of them had no label. And then it all moved to Section 504, where it was accommodations and services. And I can remember during the course of my career that diagnosticians and SPED teachers would say, I don't understand how it's not SPED because the receiving services. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't write the laws. So, I just went with it. Now, let me be honest. There was always a dual pathway, right? You could be dyslexic and receive services through Section 504 and get accommodations, or you could be dyslexic under an IEP and receive accommodations and modifications and services, right? When I say services, I mean therapy or dyslexia instruction from somebody who's well-trained. And so if you would take this time to kind of explain to some of our listeners who may not know the differences in the pathways between 504 and special education for dyslexia.
And I'll just add that when I first found out about Texas's way of doing things, I was mortified and shocked as well. Because there's no way you can't do that. So I'm like, I didn't understand how they were getting away with it. And so there's much more to that story, but I'll leave that for later. So the difference is with 504, you can get services. Most states don't provide services under 504. Texas is kind of an island in that circumstance. And in 504, you can get services, but that's it. There's no oversight. There are no timelines. There are no goals. There's nothing to provide, any kind of accountability. So with an IEP, if you have an IEP, you don't also need a 504 because the accommodations are also in the IEP. So when you have an IEP, you have timelines, you have yearly meetings, you have goals, you have to have progress on goals, you have to measure goals, you have to talk about goals. You don't have any of that on a 504. So when you go the 504 path, you're really just kind of putting all your faith in whoever's doing it and not really, like I said earlier, not having any accountability. So if a student has dyslexia and they qualify for services, they have to be on an IEP because that is the only way we can document their progress, their lack of progress, their services, their hours. What if all of a sudden, they stopped getting services? I had a client recently who told me we had agreed that he would be getting a certain level of tutoring. And then I find out 4 months later that the teacher had stopped that because he was too busy 4 months ago and never told us. And I'm like, you can't do that. So on an IEP, I had some leverage to say, look, this isn't the IEP. You can't do that. On a 504, I don't have tons of leverage. So, really, if a student needs services, they have to be on an IEP. I don't know why or how Texas did that. I know that's a whole different topic. But if you're a parent and you have a student who qualifies for services, who has a disability and it's affecting their academic achievement level, then they should be on an IEP.
No, so now because the pendulum swung the other way, which is, they should be evaluated under special education. But kids who maybe had been considered for services before, like the 2E kids, they're not qualifying now because of that. So what's your thoughts on that? Because we know with the twice exceptional students that they're way up there. Like I can think of a student I had that had 140 IQ, but he was performing okay. He was doing okay. They just thought, if he put out more effort, and then he got an evaluation and he was dyslexic. And they're like, well, we just don't see a need for him to receive dyslexia therapy. Well, why not?
That one's really hard. There are a couple of things you can do. Is you can just take notes as a parent about how hard they're working at home. So you can keep a homework log to say, it's taking them 3 hours to do what all his peers are taking an hour to do. This is where stop if they're younger, stop after 45 minutes and say, this is where we stopped after 45 minutes. When it comes to scores, sometimes when a 2A kid, I'll look at how well they're doing in other areas. So if they're scoring really, really high in, let's just say it's language, like auditory language, like story recall when someone reads them a story, but they're scoring average on word reading, then that to me is evidence that they are not where they should be and they do qualify for services, even if it's average, because their ability is up here as proven by other areas of learning. So we have the evidence that they can learn. But, just because they're at average, if their ability is really high, then and their other areas are average, just because it's average doesn't automatically disqualify them from services. You have to look at where they should be performing. It's a difficult one, though, because they want kids to be below average. So you just have to be really good at articulating that.
Right.
Yeah, we run into that quite a bit through different school districts, and different school districts seem to interpret the testing in different ways as well.
Well, I remember I had an admin years and years ago when this issue came up, and they said dyslexia should not be like the armed forces. And I go, what? What do you mean? They go, be all that you can be. That's not your job. If they're scoring where I was like, oh. Okay.
That's interesting.
I've also run into, kind of along the same lines, I've run into administrators that liked it when we got the profile sheet and we would line up all the numbers, and the numbers would be, okay, they're average to above average. And then we'd see below average numbers or something that was very obvious visually. And I've had an administrator before where the numbers didn't line up the way he expected them to be visually. And he'd say, well, I just don't even know how to diagnose dyslexia anymore, because we were presenting this as, this kid looks dyslexic because of X, Y, and Z. We'd have all of our data from prior exposure to his school, preschool, his home life, all of the exposure that he needed was there. And the parent had concerns, it just was all the information was adequate to show that this child had dyslexia. But the administrator said, I don't even know how to diagnose it. Well, that's not his job to diagnose it.
That's not his job.
And that's where I feel like, and some schools we're running into those types of problems that sometimes the administrator takes that on themselves. And I think that maybe with the school districts now in Texas having to be accountable for IDEA laws and regulations, I believe that'll kind of work itself out in the wash. But leading that up to, it's also taking a lot longer to get tested too with this IDEA law. So do you have any input on that as far as what parents are going through, anything related to that?
I think that if a parent can, they should bring somebody with them at all times. I don't think anybody should go by themselves ever. It could be an advocate. If you're going to bring an attorney, you have to tell the school you're bringing an attorney. I would start with an advocate. If you can't do that for whatever reason, bring a friend, bring a spouse, bring a sister, bring a brother, bring your neighbor, bring another parent of someone who has dyslexia, but don't go alone. You can even bring your phone. I say in my book, even if you want to text somebody during the meeting, text them. They should also be recording the meeting, every single meeting. I don't care if you feel like it's an aggressive move. It's not. It's just, it's a lot of information to take in. It's very emotional. So you might miss something. It's kind of like going to the doctor and they tell you there's something wrong with you. You kind of blank out everything after that. And so, want to go back and listen to it again. Or you can say, well, my spouse isn't here, so I want to record it so he or she can listen to it. It's usually the mom who's at the meeting. If they're delaying they can't delay assessment. There are rules in place. So, once they put in, depending on your state, once you put in a written request, they have to respond within a certain amount of time. They cannot push it back. So like if you put it in towards the end of school and they say, oh, we're just not going to start till the beginning of school, they can't do that. So, make sure you just send an email back and say, no, sorry, it starts now. I know that the summer doesn't count, but the week before the summer counts. And so you have to get started, the week that the school starts. Don't let them delay assessment for RTI. That's something they're allowed to do. If they say, well, we want to do RTI, then make sure they say that in prior written notice. They have to say it in writing. Make sure you do everything in writing. Don't talk to anyone. If you talk to somebody, follow up in writing. But if they delay RTI, you can remind them, say, that's just not, you're not allowed to delay assessment because you want to try RTI. You can't do that. And there's actually a memo from the United States Department of Education, the dyslexia memo from 2015. So if you just Google Dyslexia Guidance Letter 2015, it'll have all the information in there. So if anyone pushes back, you can send that to them. I would bring that to every single meeting. They can't delay assessment if they're not 2 grades behind yet. I like that one a lot. You can't do that. And, if they're going to delay assessment, they have to put all of their reasoning in prior written notice. So you want to make sure everything that they send you is in that letter. If they just deny assessment but don't give you a reason, you have to respond and say, I need a reason. And because you want to make sure that they're documenting all of their missteps as they're going. You can't be too young to diagnose. You can have them, I don't want to say diagnose. In most states, they don't diagnose dyslexia. In most states, they're just determining eligibility. Texas is the only state where they diagnose. So if you're in another state, then you want to make sure that you can assess your child for special education services as soon as kindergarten. I would prefer first grade. So don't let them tell you they're too young. They're going to outgrow it. You know your child better than anybody else. You know your child's behind. Your child knows if they're behind. So just make sure you write a really good letter requesting assessment. What other reasons do they deny assessment for? RTI, not 2 grades behind, and then too young. I think those are the main ones that they usually try to deny for. But they can't do that. That's the main idea here, is just make sure that you kind of push back on that and have your data with you and your language from IDEA behind you when you send a letter saying you can't do that.
Or what if RTI has helped? I've had that happen too, where RTI has helped and they're doing better, but there's still concerns from parents, or the teacher is even still seeing something.
Yeah, that's great, but we still need to assess and find out what's wrong. Why do they need RTI at all in the first place? And what if they hit a wall in RTI and then they don't go any further, and now they have to start all over again, with a new assessment. There's no reason to delay assessment. Assessing a kid doesn't harm the child. I do believe some parents overassess, and I don't appreciate it when parents assess their kids too much. But everyone needs to know what's happening. So the label. I always say the label is liberating, because when you tell someone what's going on, they can take all of that shame and self-loathing off, because now they know it's dyslexia. So if you ask adults, they prefer to know it's dyslexia than sit in the classroom and not know what's wrong.
One of the things want to kind of go back to the ARD meeting and how you said to bring somebody in with you. Every district I've been in had done this. They would do blanket accommodations for dyslexia, check off and for understanding, preferential seatings, avoid penalizing for spelling errors, except on a spelling test. All of those. Those are the 3 that just trip right off my tongue. And I remember thinking, once I was kind of in the swing of it for a while, thinking, well, that doesn't sound really, because they called them, let's give them the dyslexia accommodations. And I'm like, oh, okay, but then it's supposed to be more individualized than that.
Yeah, and you don't forget that if you have an IEP and they qualify for services, that they get assistive technology assessment too. So sometimes you have to educate the team about why assistive technology is good for kids with dyslexia, because they're really in that mind frame that they're using it for nonverbal kids or kids who need it to help communicate. But they forget about books on audio and keyboarding and speech to text, text to speech. One of the things that I'm coming across is that all of our computers now have so many things on it automatically that the teams are saying, well, they already have access to all of that because everyone has a laptop, and all the laptops have speech to text and text to speech, and all of our books are on audio. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? You have to put that in the IEP, and you have to put it there for a couple of reasons, because what if they switch schools or districts, for one? So it has to be documented. And when they go to college and when they go to take those college entrance exams, they need to see that there's a history of them using the accommodations. They don't like, juniors all of a sudden needing accommodations because it looks fishy. And I understand that. So, also, like you said, they have to be individualized. Not every kid with dyslexia needs the front row seat. You know what I mean? And then, I always put as many accommodations in there as possible. One of them is never to read out loud ever, unless they raise their hand. And the other thing I always clarify is, look, to the student, I usually say, you've got all these accommodations. You don't have to use them. They're there if you need them. I heard one other advocate say something really interesting, and he said, well, I do want them to use them, because what if they're not using them because they're too embarrassed and they'd help them? And I get that. That's a valid point. But I guess it's based on the age of the student. So I have one student who didn't want tutoring anymore. And I said, look, that's fine, but if you don't use your accommodations, you're going to fail. So just make sure you use them. And he did okay. But you have to be like that. He was a teenager, so it's a little easier to, once they hit high school, it becomes really difficult.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. One other thing while you were talking that made me think is that, of course, dyslexia seldom goes it alone. It's got a comorbidity with mostly ADHD, but we can see dyscalculia, dysgraphia. And I can think of when I would do assessments for dyslexia, and we started to bring in some dysgraphia, just qualitative pieces that maybe we're considering for the student. And they would do that blanket statement again of allow them to use the keyboard. And we hear people all the time say, oh, kids are just so techie. They just pick up on it like that. Well, they're techie with YouTube. They're techie with Minecraft. Or I don't know, I may be throwing out old stuff. Maybe they're techie with other things now. And is it really appropriate for a first grader to do keyboarding? Because they don't have that digit span necessarily with their fingers to do that.
Yeah, usually they're just pressing buttons on a big screen. Yeah. Well, and the keyboarding thing too is interesting to me because one of my students was slower on a keyboard. I mean, his handwriting was terrible and it was hard, but after a while, I'm like, it's better if you just write it because it's going to take you forever to try to keyboard it. So accommodations just depend on the student. Not everybody likes books on audio either. There's like everyone should have books on audio. I'm like, not everybody. When I listen to a book on audio, I space out within like 10 seconds and I've missed a whole chapter. And then some people really, they focus in. So just, it has to be individualized. It has to be. And, and I would also argue that for first graders, if they're having symptoms and signs that they're going to struggle with reading and spelling early, then we need to get them listening to books early, though, so that they have access to that vocabulary and that story structure and all of that, while their peers are also getting access to that, because they're going to be stuck in these decodable books for a while to help them with their reading. So they also need access to what a good story actually sounds like.
Yes. Perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Now, going back to the accommodations, I wanted to touch in on one other thing. I've also had admins say that they want to pull back on accommodations by a certain age, say 5th grade, 6th grade. It's time for them to start pulling back because they need to start becoming more independent. What are your thoughts on that?
I hear that too. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm like, it's kind of like going to the gym, right? You're getting good. You're going to the gym all the time. And then you stop going to the gym. And what happens? You lose what you gained, or you stagnate. And so no, kids with dyslexia are probably always going to need accommodations. It depends on the severity too. Like if they're more moderate to severe, they're going to need their accommodations for longer, maybe all their lives, than if they're more mild. If you're more mild, you might be able to pull back a little bit, but I wouldn't suggest it because what harm is it doing? It's not doing any harm. So I don't understand.
Well, and I think too, it comes back to evaluating the child and what the child is needing. If the child still needs those accommodations, then they give them the accommodations, like you were saying.
And they feel unsafe without them. It feels unsafe.
Yes.
It's an unsafe environment.
This concludes part 1 of our interview with Dr. Kelli Sandman-Hurley. Next week, we will post part 2, so stay tuned to the Dyslexia Duo.